June 27, 1976. High above the Mediterranean Sea, an Air France commercial jet, carrying over 250 passengers, is suddenly taken over by 4 heavily armed terrorists. Brandishing automatic weapons and explosives, they force the pilots to redirect the aircraft, eventually landing at the remote Entebbe Airport in Uganda, deep in the heart of Africa. The hijackers separate the passengers, releasing the non-Jewish hostages and keeping 106 Israeli and Jewish citizens trapped inside an old terminal building. The terrorists issue a brutal ultimatum. If Israel does not release 53 convicted militants within 1 week, they will begin executing the hostages one by one. The building is heavily guarded by Ugandan state soldiers under the command of the country's ruthless dictator Idi Amin, who openly supports the hijackers. To the global media, the situation looks completely hopeless. Entebbe is nearly 2,500 miles away from Israel, far beyond the reach of conventional military rescue. But in absolute secrecy, an elite team of Israeli commandos is standing on a runway, boarding 4 massive C-130 Hercules cargo planes. The rescue plan is completely insane. The commandos intend to fly low over enemy territory at midnight, land on a dark runway right under the noses of the Ugandan military, and storm the terminal before the hijackers can pull a single trigger. If a single Ugandan radar tower detects the low-flying planes during the 7-hour journey, the entire rescue force will be shot down over the African wilderness. If the commandos hesitate for even 5 seconds inside the terminal, the hijackers will detonate their explosives, killing everyone inside. They are launching the most daring, long-range hostage rescue operation in military history, and the clock is ticking down to the final deadline. This was Operation Entebbe. It remains a legendary masterpiece of military precision and absolute daring. It was a crisis that forced a nation to rewrite the laws of tactical warfare, proving that no matter how distant the threat, absolute surprise can breach the most heavily fortified strongholds on Earth. To understand the sheer madness of the rescue plan, you have to look at the immense logistical nightmare facing the Israeli military. Entebbe Airport was located deep inside Africa, surrounded by hostile nations. Flying a standard military force across that distance would require passing through the tightly monitored airspace of countries like Egypt, Sudan, and Saudi Arabia. If any of those nations spotted the Israeli aircraft on their radar screens, it would trigger an immediate military interception. The Israeli commanders realized they had to become invisible. They decided to fly their massive cargo planes in a tight formation at an altitude of less than 100 feet above the surface of the Red Sea. By skimming just above the waves, the heavy planes remained completely hidden beneath the radar grids of the surrounding enemy nations. The pilots flew completely blind in the dark, without using any external lights or radio communications, relying entirely on visual navigation and absolute nerves of steel. Meanwhile, intelligence officers in Tel Aviv were scrambling to gather blueprints of the Entebbe terminal. In a stunning stroke of luck, they discovered that the very building where the hostages were being held had been constructed years earlier by an Israeli engineering firm. The military immediately built an exact, full-scale replica of the airport terminal in the middle of the Israeli desert. The commandos trained inside the mock-up night and day, practicing their room-clearing movements until every step, every corner, and every shot was perfectly memorized. They knew exactly how many seconds it would take to sprint from the tarmac to the hostage room. On the night of July 3, 1974, the lead Israeli cargo plane quietly descended toward the pitch-black runway at Entebbe. The pilots landed the massive aircraft without any runway lights, utilizing tactical night vision arrays. The moment the plane slowed down, the rear cargo ramp dropped open, and a bizarre convoy rolled out into the dark. Leading the charge was a massive black Mercedes limousine, flanked by 2 open-top Land Rovers. The commandos had perfectly replicated the official state motorcade of the Ugandan dictator Idi Amin. They even dressed their lead soldiers in identical Ugandan military uniforms, hoping the airport guards would mistake them for the president's private security detail and allow them to drive straight up to the terminal doors without firing a shot. The deception worked perfectly for the first few hundred yards. The Ugandan sentries at the primary checkpoint saw the black Mercedes approaching, stepped out into the road, and raised their hands to salute the vehicle. But as the limousine drew closer, the Israeli commander noticed a critical detail. One of the sentries was raising his rifle, sensing something was wrong. The Israelis couldn't risk a prolonged firefight outside the building. Using silenced pistols, the Commandos took down the guards and accelerated the motorcade, racing across the tarmac toward the old terminal building as the element of absolute surprise began to slip away. The convoy slammed to a halt directly outside the terminal doors. The Commandos burst out of the vehicles, shattered the glass entrances, and flooded into the main hall with their assault weapons drawn. Using a megaphone, a soldier shouted to the crowded room in both Hebrew and English. "Stay down! Stay down! We are Israeli soldiers!" The terminal erupted into pure chaos. The hijackers and Ugandan soldiers opened fire from the shadows, kicking off a furious, close-quarters gun battle inside the dark rooms. The Israelis moved with absolute precision, clearing the main hall room by room. Within just 3 minutes of breaching the doors, all 4 terrorists were eliminated, and the Ugandan resistance was completely broken. The Commandos immediately began ushering the terrified, exhausted hostages out of the building and toward the waiting cargo planes. As the rescue force guarded the perimeter, a specialized demolition team raced across the airfield, systematically planting explosives on a row of Ugandan MiG fighter jets parked nearby. They blew up the enemy aircraft to ensure the Ugandan Air Force couldn't launch a pursuit once the rescue planes lifted back into the sky. Just 90 minutes after the first Israeli tire touched the runway at Entebbe, the massive cargo planes roared down the tarmac and lifted back into the night sky, carrying over 100 rescued citizens safely back home. The entire operation had been executed with the precision of a Swiss watch. Operation Entebbe stunned the entire global community. It completely shattered the idea that terrorists could safely hide hostages in remote, hostile nations, fundamentally changing how Western special forces handle international crises. The mission was a resounding triumph, marred only by the tragic loss of 3 hostages during the crossfire, and the death of the operational assault leader, Yonatan Netanyahu, who was fatally wounded while guiding the hostages to safety. The miracle at Entebbe showed that when human lives are hanging in the balance, the ultimate weapon isn't just firepower or numerical superiority. It proved that absolute preparation, flawless execution, and the willingness to attempt the impossible can break through the darkest traps and bring the lost back home.